Hi, my name is Vilingor, and in this video I will be talking about my experience of using almost exclusively, almost only Linux for the past 10 years as my main operative system. I've been using specifically Ubuntu for the most part, and recently I've switched to Debian. Why am I making this video? Well, to share my experience, and in doing so to help people that maybe are thinking about switching to a Linux operating system. Also, the reason for making this video is to bring more people the Linux operating system and inform more people about Linux, because Linux is awesome. So, what did I use the Linux operating system for the last 10 years? Well, pretty much for anything that you can think of. I myself am a computer guy, and I'm also kind of a jack of all trades, so I'm interested in many different fields of human endeavor. So I used Linux to make music, to edit videos, to play video games, to make video games, to program, to, of course, watch videos on YouTube and streaming platforms, to communicate with people through social media, and much, much more. And then the big question is, does it work? Am I regretting the decision to use almost exclusively Linux as my only operative system for the last 10 years? Not at all. And yes, it works. Will I be switching to Windows anytime soon? Am I thinking about switching to Windows for some reason? No, no need for it. So, to be completely honest, I have Windows 10 installed on my computer as a secondary operating system, but again, in 99% of the cases, I'm using Linux. And so, just to give you an idea what I use Windows for, I installed Windows on my PC to run one specific game, Total War Medieval 2, and mind you, the vanilla version of the game was working perfectly fine on Linux, but just this one mod was not working, and so I installed Windows and just to be able to play this specific mod. And in recent time that I can remember, when I really needed to use Windows is for reverting my Huawei smartphone to a stock ROM, because previously I had installed a custom ROM on my smartphone and I needed Huawei drivers, Huawei suite that can be only installed on Windows. So as you can see, these are very niche use cases that I need Windows for. Now I will go over some pros of Linux over Windows. And first pro is, of course, the price. That is unbeatable, because the cost of Linux is $0. Another pro of Linux is that Linux is fast and lightweight. And this is very obvious. Everything done in Linux is faster. The applications are also smaller. The entire operating system is much smaller. There's way less bloatware, and overall the experience on Linux is much smoother than the experience on Windows. Another advantage of Linux is that it is transparent. It is open source, so everybody with the knowledge can go into the code of Linux and see what is inside it. We cannot do that with Windows. Who knows what is in the Windows code? There might be spyware, maybe not, maybe yes, but we don't really know. And then, because again Linux is open source, you can go in and fix whatever problem you might be having, and also that allows for the entire community to participate in the development of Linux. which is impossible to do with Windows. And then Linux, and I don't have a clue how is it possible and how Linux does this, but there are no viruses, which also means that there are no antiviruses, which again in turn makes the operating system more fluid and less cramped with applications. But yeah, no viruses on Linux. Now let's get to some downsides of Linux. So first thing would be that Linux, generally speaking, is more difficult to use and to manage. Linux requires a user to know more about how to use a computer than Windows does. Well, actually, for the most simplest things like browsing the internet or typing some documents, at this point the level of knowledge that is necessary to do those things is the same level as in Windows. Just that for anything a little bit more complicated, it is more difficult to do things in Linux than it is in Windows. Just to better explain myself, I will make the example of this camera that I am filming myself with right now. I bought this camera recently, Logitech Brio 4K, and of course I needed to make it work within the operating system. I needed drivers, but then the manufacturer of this camera does not provide Linux drivers. And then what Linux does is that it detects automatically the camera without any need to install any drivers. But then what the problem is that it is more difficult to set up the camera and to make it work properly, because again there is also a lack of tutorials online how to do it, because the users that use Linux are a smaller community. So there is less information about various problems that one encounters while using Linux. Another downside of Linux is that it is slow to adopt some bleeding edge features. For example, a few years ago there was this feature that was implemented by big commercial 3D editing software like, for example, Maya, and this feature was the ability to render every single hair on, let's say, a person's head, which made possible the rendering of every single hair individually, which in turn made for a very realistic representation of fur on animals, for example. It took Linux some 2 years to implement the same feature through Blender, an open source 3D editing software for Linux. Another downside of Linux is that even though we are able to run most of Windows games in Linux through an app called Wine, and this is really amazing that we can do this, these games that were originally made for Windows, well, some of them work flawlessly in Linux and other ones don't work at all. Generally speaking, I would say that the performance of Windows games under Linux is some 20% lower. Windows games under Linux are some 20% slower on average, so that is maybe not the ideal thing for professional gamers. And then there are some quirks specific to Linux that I encountered, and I don't know if it's me not knowing how to use the operating system, which chances are is the case, or is it the operating system itself that is faulty. But however, I encountered this issue throughout all the operating systems that I had and throughout all the different PCs, so throughout all the different hardware that I had. And the problem, namely, is that the USB data transfer is excruciatingly slow. So when I need to transfer, let's say, a movie from the PC to the USB stick, it takes forever. And more or less that would be it about the pros and cons of Linux. I just want to say that the main Linux problem is actually a small user base. Linux is not mainstream. Not so many people are using Linux as an operating system. Most people are using Windows. And in turn, it makes it so, for example, that the big companies that make hardware often don't actually make drivers for Linux. And also big companies that develop software and video games do not develop and make video games, for example, for Linux. Again, just because not enough people are using Linux. But things are changing and more people are using Linux, and me making this video is also my way of contributing to this change, because Linux is a superior, a better operating system in price, functionality and performance. I think the future is Linux. And there is a saying, the dog that you feed is the dog that wins. So if we want to have a transparent, free, functional, fast operating system, then we have to make a choice. Then it's just a matter of supporting that operating system by simply using it. So let's switch to Linux today and make a better world. And that would be all from me in this video. Take care and see you in the next one. Bye.